In 2015, a man named Leonard Gigowski died in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was in his 90s. He had run a corner grocery store in his neighborhood for much of his life. He had owned a modest dance hall where local couples once met and married. He had never married himself, lived simply, drove ordinary cars, and the people of his old neighborhood thought of him with affection as a kind and frugal old shopkeeper. When the people handling Leonard Gigowski's estate examined his affairs, they found something that did not match the corner store grocer at all. A portfolio of stocks. Strong, established American companies held quietly for decades. The total across every share and every reinvested dividend came to roughly $13 million. Leonard Gigowski had never run a large business. A corner grocery and a neighborhood dance hall are not the engines of a $13 million fortune. He had no inheritance that anyone knew of. He had served in the Navy, come home, worked behind a counter, and lived a small and frugal life in the same Milwaukee neighborhood for the better part of a century. His income was the income of a neighborhood shopkeeper. Modest, honest, unremarkable, and yet, in his quiet, methodical, deeply private way, across decade after decade, he assembled a fortune large enough to send generations of students through the doors of the school that had shaped him, on a grocer's income with nobody watching. This is the story of how he did it, and what it can teach the rest of us. Leonard Gigowski was born in the early 1922s in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He grew up in a working-class, heavily Catholic, immigrant-rooted neighborhood of that industrial city. A world of breweries and factories, of corner shops and parish churches, of close streets where everyone knew everyone. As a young man, Leonard attended a Catholic high school in Milwaukee. And it is essential to hold that fact at the very center of this story, because everything Leonard Gigowski would later build, the entire $13 million fortune, would in the end flow directly back to that school. His education there mattered to him. It shaped him. It gave a working-class young man a foundation, a community, a set of values. Leonard Gigowski never forgot that. He carried his gratitude for that school quietly for some 70 years. He came of age in hard times, the Great Depression, and that experience marked him as it marked so many of the people in this channel's stories, with a deep and permanent frugality. He learned young the value of a dollar and the danger of waste. Then came the war. Leonard Gigowski served in the United States Navy during the Second World War, as so many young men of his generation did, and came home to Milwaukee afterward, with the same plain habits and the same quiet character he had left with. Back home, Leonard built his working life around his neighborhood. He ran a corner grocery store, the kind of small family-style shop that anchored working-class neighborhoods all across mid-century America. He sold groceries and household goods to the families on his streets. He knew his customers by name. He knew their children. He also, at one point, owned and ran a dance hall, a modest local establishment, a place where the young people of the neighborhood gathered, where couples met, where some of them danced their first dance together. Before going on to marry, Leonard Gigowski never married. He lived as a lifelong bachelor, frugally and simply, in his Milwaukee neighborhood. He was known to everyone around him as a kind, decent, hard-working, and notably thrifty man. A fixture of the community, a familiar face behind the counter, a modest old shopkeeper, not one of his neighbors imagined what he was quietly building behind that grocer's apron. At some point in his working life, Leonard Gigowski made a decision that the people around him never saw. He decided that the modest, hard-won profits of his grocery store and his dance hall would not simply be spent or left to sit idle in a bank. He decided to become an investor. Think about the position Leonard Gigowski was in. A corner grocery is a hard, low-margin business. You earn your money a few cents at a time on cans and loaves and small daily purchases through long hours behind a counter. A grocer does not get rich from the grocery. Leonard understood that. He understood that the store, however faithfully he ran it, had a ceiling, that the path to any real and lasting wealth would not run through the cash register. It would run through ownership, through becoming a part owner of businesses far larger than his own. So Leonard Gigowski began to buy stock. He took the surplus that his frugal life and his modest businesses produced, the gap between what he earned and the very little he spent, and he steadily, patiently put it into shares of strong American companies. He was not a financier. He had no special training. He was a grocer who had decided to teach himself the discipline of ownership and then to practice it for the rest of his life. And the companies he chose tell us he was a sensible and careful man. Leonard Gigowski did not gamble. He did not chase speculation or the exciting tip. He bought solid, established, dividend-paying American businesses. The durable backbone of the economy, the kind of companies that sell things people use every day. He bought, in effect, the same category of company that Ronald Read bought in Vermont, that Ann Schuyber bought in New York, that quiet, patient investors have always bought. Leonard Gigowski had never met those people. He arrived on his own, at the very same wisdom. Fertile. And once Leonard Gigowski bought a company, he did the second harder thing. He held it. He did not trade in and out. He did not sell because a price had risen and a profit could be taken, or because a price had fallen and fear had crept in. He bought ownership, and then he simply kept it, year after year, decade after decade. The way a man keeps a tool he intends to use for the rest of his life. The buying was deliberate, but the holding, the long, patient, unbroken holding, that is where the fortune was actually made. So picture the whole of it, the shape of an ordinary day. A man rises early, opens a small grocery, works a long, honest shift selling bread and milk and canned goods to his neighbours. He closes the shop, he counts the till, and then, quietly from the modest surplus of that day, he adds another small piece of ownership to a portfolio that no one around him knows exists. Day after day, year after year, an entire working life, turned a little at a time into shares. The first principle of Leonard Gigowski's fortune is the one without which none of the rest could have happened. He created a surplus. He arranged his entire life so that year after year he earned more than he spent, and the gap between the two was wide. Understand what a grocer's income actually is. It is not a large salary. It is the thin margin left over after a small shop's costs are paid. The stock, the rent, the light, the long unpaid hours of the owner himself. Leonard Gigowski did not have a large income to work with. What he had instead was iron control over the other side of the equation. He could not easily make the income much bigger, but he could keep the spending very, very small. And that is exactly what he did for his entire adult life. Consider the choices that made the gap so wide. Leonard Gigowski never married, and a single man's costs are genuinely lighter. We will be honest about that advantage, as this channel always is. But the frugality went far beyond that. He lived simply in a modest home in the same working-class neighborhood for decade after decade. He drove ordinary, inexpensive cars. He did not chase a grander house, a newer model, a richer wardrobe, the constant small upgrades that quietly drained so many lives. He had grown up in the Depression. He had learned, in the hardest possible classroom, that waste was the enemy, and that a dollar kept was a dollar that could go to work. He never unlearned it. To Leonard Gigowski, frugality was not a hardship. It was simply the way a sensible man lived. And here is why that wide gap mattered so much. The gap between earning and spending is the raw fuel of every fortune in this channel's stories. It is the only money that can ever be invested. A person who spends everything they earn, however large the income, has nothing to put to work. And so, no matter how clever their investing might be, there is simply nothing for the cleverness to act upon. Leonard Gigowski, on a modest grocer's income, generated a steady surplus year after year. because he had ruthlessly, permanently capped his spending. That surplus was the seed. Everything else grew from it, and there is a quieter strength in his frugality, one that is easy to miss. Because Leonard Gigowski's spending was so modest, his life was genuinely cheap to run. And a life that is cheap to run is a life that does not need to raid its investments. His ordinary daily costs were small enough that the income from his shop comfortably covered them. He never had to sell shares to pay for an emergency, or a comfort, or a sudden expense. Because there was always margin, always a cushion of plain, low-cost living between him and any need to reach into the portfolio. His frugality did not only create the surplus that built the fortune, it also protected the fortune, once built, from ever being touched. We should pause here and be very honest, the way this channel always is. Leonard Gigowski's life was, by any normal measure, an extremely modest one. He lived without luxury, without display, without much of what the world spends its money on. And there is a real question worth asking, whether a life that frugal gives up too much along the way. We will return to that question honestly before we close. But on the narrow point, this principle is built around how a grocer accumulates the raw capital for a fortune. The lesson is exact and undeniable. He spent far less than he earned. He did it for decades, and the wide, unbroken gap between the two is where the entire $13 million began its long life. We sometimes assume that a fortune requires a fortune's income. Leonard Gigowski's life is the quiet proof that it does not. The size of the income sets the ceiling, but the size of the gap, the discipline of spending, sets how much of that ceiling you actually reach. Leonard Gigowski had a low ceiling, and he reached almost all the way to it, every single year, for the better part of a century. The first principle was the surplus. The second principle is the engine that turned a grocer's modest surplus into a fortune of 8 figures. Leonard Gigowski reinvested every dividend faithfully for decades. The companies Leonard Gigowski bought were dividend-paying companies. Every quarter, simply for owning the shares, they sent him cash, real money, paid into his accounts, his to do with as he pleased. Most investors take that cash and spend it. It feels like a reward, a small harvest, money that has somehow been earned, and is therefore free to enjoy. Leonard Gigowski did not see it that way. He took every dividend from every company, and he used it to buy more shares, more ownership, more of the same strong businesses he already held. This sounds modest. It sounds almost too simple to be the answer. It is, in fact, the mathematical difference between a comfortable retirement and $13 million. Here is what reinvesting a dividend actually does. When a company you own pays, you cash, and you use that cash to buy more shares of that same company. Those new shares then pay you their own dividends the next quarter, which buy still more shares, which pay still more dividends. Your stake does not simply grow. It grows on top of its own previous growth. Stretch that across decades and across a whole portfolio of strong companies, and the line on the page stops behaving like a gentle slope. It starts to climb like a wall. Leonard Gigowski compounded this way for decade after decade. He did not take the dividends out to improve his daily life. He did not use them for a better car, a nicer home, a softer year. Every dividend from every company went straight back into ownership. His portfolio was not a source of spending money. It was a machine, and he fed the machine faithfully every quarter, adding his fresh grocery, store surplus on one side, and the reinvested dividends on the other, until the year he died. And there is a second thing the reinvestment quietly accomplished, psychological rather than mathematical. Because Leonard Gigowski never took the dividend cash out, he never grew used to having it. It never became part of his spending, It never became money he would notice missing. It lived entirely inside the machine, and so the machine was never raided. Many investors fail here, not through one dramatic mistake, but through a slow leak, a dividend spent here, a gain withdrawn there. Leonard Gigowski sealed the leak completely. Nothing flowed out. Everything the portfolio earned, the portfolio kept and reinvested. To make the arithmetic concrete, consider the shape of it. A portfolio of strong, dividend-paying American companies, with every dividend reinvested and nothing withdrawn, can compound over the long run at a rate in the range that broad American stocks have historically delivered. At such a rate, money doubles roughly every 7 to 10 years. A grocer's steady contributions, plus a steady stream of dividends buying ever more shares, doubling and doubling and doubling again across most of a lifetime, each doubling larger than the one before. Sure. And here is the cruel and beautiful shape of it, the shape this channel finds in every story. For the first 10, 15, 20 years, Leonard Gigowski's portfolio grew, but in sums that, while real, did not look like a fortune. A patient observer looking at his accounts in, say, 1975 would have seen a respectable, healthy holding for a frugal man. Not $13 million. The truly staggering wealth arrived in the final stretch. It arrived because he was still holding, still adding, still reinvesting. When the late doublings came, the early doublings turned thousands into tens of thousands. The late doublings decades on, each added millions. Leonard Gigowski did not get rich slowly and evenly. He got rich, like everyone in these stories, mostly at the end, and only because he was still there. Leonard Gigowski spent 30 years feeding a machine that gave him almost nothing visible in return. He drove the same modest cars. He lived in the same modest home. To the world, nothing about him changed. And then, in the last stretch of a long life, the machine he had been quietly feeding turned into $13 million. The third principle of Leonard Gigowski's story is the one that gave the whole fortune its meaning. And it is the principle this channel returns to in every single episode. He knew what the money was for. Leonard Gigowski had no wife and no children. He had no family business to pass down, no direct heirs waiting for his estate. A man in that position has a genuine question to answer, perhaps the most important question this whole channel asks. What is the fortune ultimately for? And Leonard Gigowski had answered that question quietly long before the end. His wealth would go to the Catholic high school he had attended as a young man. It would fund scholarships, financial help for the students who came after him, young people from his kind of neighborhood, given the same foundation that the school had once given him. Understand what that clarity of purpose did for him. When you know exactly what your wealth is for, the decades of frugality stop being a deprivation. Leonard Gigowski was not denying himself a grander life and quietly resenting it. He had a purpose, the education of the young people who would walk the halls of his old school, and every year he held and reinvested. That purpose grew larger and more powerful. His thrift was not grim self-denial. It was the steady, satisfying growth of a gift he was quietly preparing for a place he loved far. And Leonard Gigowski did the essential, practical thing, the thing some others in this channel's stories failed to do. He planned. He did not simply hold a wish in his head and hope it would somehow be honored. He set his intention down properly, in a valid, clear, legally sound form, so that when he was gone, the $13 million would flow, exactly where he had decided it should flow. He arranged for a scholarship fund. He worked, as careful people do, with the structure needed to carry his wishes out after he could no longer speak for himself. There is a lesson in this that applies no matter the size of the fortune. A purpose is what holds a long financial plan together. Without one, even a disciplined saver eventually drifts. The frugality slackens, the spending creeps upward, the plan slowly dissolves. With a real, felt, specific purpose. The discipline has a centre of gravity. Leonard Gigowski's centre of gravity was his old school and the students who would come after him. It held him steady for a lifetime, and it ensured that, at the end, the staggering result of his patience would not be wasted or lost or fought over, but aimed precisely at the thing he believed in. If you wanted to summarize what made it possible for a corner grocer to build $13 million, you could do worse than this list. A wide and unbroken gap between earning and spending. A portfolio of strong companies, bought and never sold. Every dividend reinvested for decades with nothing withdrawn. A purpose, his old school, that he loved and never lost sight of. And the careful, responsible planning to make certain the gift would land exactly where he aimed it, for the entire span in which his grocery store surplus was quietly becoming a fortune. Leonard Gigowski told the world essentially nothing. He did not behave like a man sitting on a hidden fortune. He did not boast, he did not hint, he did not upgrade his life to match his secret balance sheet. He kept the same shop, the same neighbourhood, the same modest home, the same plain, inexpensive cars. He remained, to his customers, his neighbours, and even those close to him, simply Leonard Gigowski, the kind, frugal, hard-working old grocer they had always known. The $13 million was invisible, because Leonard Gigowski never once put it on display. There is a lesson in that long silence, the same one this channel keeps uncovering. Leonard Gigowski's compounding succeeded, in part because his wealth was quiet. No one pressured him to spend it, because no one knew it existed. No one envied it, no one schemed for it, no one talked him into a clever move or a foolish one. The portfolio sat undisturbed, in a sealed machine inside a modest life, because Leonard Gigowski kept the entire thing out of sight. For decade after quiet decade, and in keeping with everything this channel teaches, Leonard Gigowski did not do all of it entirely alone. He made his own decisions. The choices were always his. But a portfolio that reaches 8 figures and an estate plan that must hold firmly after death are not things a careful man leaves to chance. Leonard Gigowski had the help of financial and legal professionals. He arranged the proper documents. He set up the structure of a scholarship fund. We say this in every episode. The discipline was his. The patience, above all, was his. But he surrounded that discipline with trusted, competent people who helped make certain it would hold. Leonard Gigowski lived into his 90s. He had given the better part of a century to one Milwaukee neighborhood, a working life behind a grocery counter, a dance hall where his neighbors had courted and married, a modest home, a frugal routine, and a decades-long secret he had told almost no one. When he died in 2015 and the people handling his estate examined his affairs, the full number became known. The corner grocer had left roughly $13 million, and everyone who learned it reacted exactly as the world always reacts in these stories, with astonishment. A frugal old shopkeeper. $13 million. There had been no large business, no invention that minted a fortune, no inheritance from a wealthy family. There had only been one careful man, a wide and unbroken savings gap, a portfolio bought and never sold, and the simple, world-changing power of dividends reinvested, and compound growth left entirely undisturbed. When Leonard Gigowski's estate was settled, his fortune did exactly what he had quietly planned across all those decades for it to do. It went to his old school. It went to education. Leonard Gigowski directed his fortune into a scholarship fund for the Catholic high school in Milwaukee that he had attended as a young man. $13 million, the entire patient accumulation of a grocer's lifetime, turned into financial help for students. Year after year into the future, young people from working-class Milwaukee families would be able to attend that school and carry away from it the same foundation, the same community, the same start in life that it had once given to a Depression-era boy named Leonard Gigowski. Think about the symmetry of it, the same quiet symmetry this channel finds again and again. Leonard Gigowski had been given something by that school as a young man, an education, a footing, a sense of what a working-class boy could become. He never forgot it, and at the end of a long life he took the fortune that his patience had grown, and he gave it back in full to the very place that had given him his start. The boy who had walked through those doors with nothing became the old man whose gift would hold those doors open for generations of children he would never meet, and consider what his patience truly created. When you give a few $1,000s to a school, you fund something real but bounded. A single scholarship, a single year. When you give $13 million to a school, you change what that institution can do for decades. You endow a scholarship fund that will outlast everyone now living. You open the door year after year after year for students whose families could never have afforded it otherwise. Leonard Gigowski's decades of frugality and reinvestment did not merely multiply his money, it multiplied his gratitude. It took one grocer's quiet thankfulness for his own education and gave that thankfulness the power to act on the world. Long after he was gone, he had no children to inherit his wealth. He had no family business to pass down. But he had a purpose, the school that had shaped him and the students who would come after. And he gave a lifetime of patient compounding entirely to that purpose. He wanted the institution that had given a poor young man his foundation to be able to give that same foundation permanently to others. And with a grocer's modest surplus and decades of patience, he made it so, on a scale that the people of his old neighborhood could scarcely believe. Now, what does Leonard Gigowski's story actually teach us? Lesson 1. The gap is the fuel. Leonard Gigowski never had a large income. He had a grocer's thin margin. What he had instead was iron control over his spending, and a savings gap that stayed wide for an entire lifetime. The size of your income sets a ceiling on what is possible, but the size of the gap between what you earn and what you spend decides how much of that ceiling you actually reach. You may not be able to make your income much larger, but almost anyone can widen the gap. And the gap, not the income, is the fuel a fortune is built from. Lesson 2. Own businesses, not prices. Leonard Gigowski did not buy flickering stock quotes or chase exciting tips. He bought partial ownership of real established American companies, businesses that earned real profits and sent him real cash. When the market fell, he did not look at a lower price and feel poorer. He owned pieces of solid companies, and a frightening headline did not change what those companies actually were. So he held. If you think of your portfolio as a screen full of numbers, every crash is a crisis. If you think of it as a collection of businesses you are proud to own, most crashes are simply a sale. 5. Lesson 3. Reinvestment is the engine. The dividends Leonard Gigowski received and refused to spend, those steady quarterly cash payments fed straight back into more shares, are responsible for a great share of his ultimate fortune. Most people who own dividend-paying stocks take the cash out and spend it. Leonard Gigowski did not once for decades. That single repeated choice, reinvest, 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 is the structural difference between an ordinary retirement and $13 million. Picture two investors side by side to see how large this one choice really is. Both buy the same strong companies, both hold for the same decades, both refuse to sell. The only difference between them is what they do with the dividends. The first takes the cash and spends it, a comfort here, a small luxury there, year after year. At the end, that investor owns exactly the shares they originally bought. A good outcome. The second investor, the Leonard Gigowski, feeds every dividend back in. At the end, that investor owns the original shares, plus all the shares the dividends bought, plus all the shares that those shares dividends bought. Compounding inside the position for decade after decade. Same companies, same patience. And yet, the second portfolio can finish several times larger than the first. Not because of a better stock, only because of a setting switched on once and never switched off. Lesson 4. Quiet beats loud. Leonard Gigowski told almost no one. He did not display his wealth, did not upgrade his life to match it, did not seek admiration. His fortune stayed invisible, and that invisibility protected it. No one pressured it, envied it, or talked him into a mistake. The discipline to compound for decades is in large part the discipline of not needing anyone to know. If you require an audience to confirm that you are winning, you will eventually make a loud move to prove it. And loud moves in investing are almost always the wrong ones. Build in the quiet. Let the loud world look right past you. Lesson 5. Have a circle. Leonard Gigowski made his own decisions, but he did not execute alone. He had financial and legal professionals. He had proper documents. He set up the structure of a scholarship fund. His fortune did not end in confusion or a courtroom. It flowed exactly where he had aimed it. A great deal of personal finance advice quietly implies that you must do everything yourself, in total isolation. You should not. You make the decisions. The choices stay yours. But you must have trusted, capable people to place your orders, hold your paperwork, and carry out your plan. The decision is yours. The execution should never be solitary. Lesson 6. Know what it is for. Leonard Gigowski knew, across all those decades, exactly what his fortune was for. The school that had shaped him, and the students who would follow. That purpose is what made his frugality effortless, rather than painful. He was not denying himself a grander life. He was growing a gift. If you do not know what your wealth is ultimately for, you will spend more of it than you should, and the discipline will erode. If you do know, if the purpose is real and you can feel it, then the decades of patience acquire a centre of gravity that holds for a lifetime. But there is one more lesson in Leonard Gigowski's life. And unlike the others, this one is a gentle caution. We have admired his discipline honestly in this episode. We should be just as honest about its price. Leonard Gigowski's frugality was real and lifelong. He lived without luxury, without much of what the world spends its money on. And he never married or had a family of his own. We are not here to tell you how he should have lived his private life. That was his to choose, and he chose it. But this channel has a duty to say plainly that the goal of a slow fortune is not to arrive at the end of a long life with an enormous number and very little else. The number is a tool. It is not the prize. So take the engine of Leonard Gigowski's life, the wide savings gap, the strong companies, the reinvested dividends, the refusal to sell, the clear and loved purpose. That engine is sound, and this channel will recommend it in every episode. But as you build, spend a small, deliberate, guilt-free portion of your one life on the people and the experiences that a life is actually measured in. A high savings rate and a sealed compounding machine remain the foundation. That does not change. But time with the people you love is not a leak in the machine. It is the entire reason. The machine is worth building. Build like Leonard Gigowski, but live along the road. A little more fully than a grocer's ledger alone would tell you to. The country is full of Leonard Gigowskis. Quiet, careful, frugal people holding their compounding tight to their chests, telling no one. Most of them will never be famous. Most of their stories will become visible, if at all only at the very end, when an executor opens a folder and sits down astonished to count. Before we close, a practical bridge from Leonard Gigowski's story to your situation. Because a case study is only useful if it changes something this week. 5. 1. Find your gap and then widen it on purpose. Leonard Gigowski's fortune began with the surplus of a frugal life, the steady distance between what he earned and the little he spent. This week, look honestly at your own spending and find that gap. Then widen it deliberately, cap the large costs, the home, the car, the way Leonard Gigowski capped his, and resist the slow upward creep of comfort. The wider the gap, the more fuel there is for everything that follows. 2. Own broad, simple, durable businesses. Leonard Gigowski assembled, by hand, a portfolio of strong dividend-paying American companies. Today, you do not have to do that by hand. A single, broad, low-cost index fund gives you partial ownership of hundreds or thousands of strong companies at once, for almost no fee. You do not need to pick the next great company. You need to own the whole shelf. And let the strongest names carry the average upward over decades. 3. Reinvest every dividend by default. This was Leonard Gigowski's engine, and in a modern brokerage account it is now a single setting. Find the option labelled Automatic Dividend Reinvestment and switch it on for every position you intend to hold for the long term. Set once, forgotten forever. It is one of the most consequential and least dramatic choices of your entire investing life. 4. Decide now how you will behave in the crashes you know are coming. Leonard Gigowski held through every downturn of a long investing life because he owned businesses, not prices, and never panicked. In your own decade, several crashes will come. Decide today, in calm times, that your plan is not to sell, that a falling market is simply a sale, and your contributions continue straight through it. Make selling slow and inconvenient. Check your portfolio rarely. Delete the app that tempts you to trade in fear. A decision made in calm is the one that holds when the fear arrives. 5. Write down your purpose, name your circle, and make your plan certain. Leonard Gigowski knew his purpose was his old school, and he had proper documents and trusted professionals to carry it out. This week, write down in plain words what your wealth is ultimately for. Identify the honest, competent people who will help you, and make sure your intentions are set down properly, validly, and findably. Leonard Gigowski's fortune reached its purpose because he did exactly this. Do not leave the destination of your life's work to chance. If you do those 5 things, even imperfectly, even slowly, you are running on your own scale the same program Leonard Gigowski ran for the better part of a century. You will probably not arrive at $13 million, but you will end up far further along than the great majority of people who out-earned you and outspent you every single year. And you will have proven in your own life the truth his story shouts. That is the quiet promise of compound interest, demonstrated on a scale almost no one expected, by a corner store grocer who spent far less than he earned. And then, for decade after decade, simply let it grow. Leonard Gigowski spent his life as a Milwaukee corner store grocer, running a small neighborhood shop, owning a modest dance hall, living as a frugal, lifelong bachelor in the same working class streets for the better part of a century. To his customers, his neighbors, even those close to him, he was a kind and thrifty old shopkeeper. That was the visible life. It hid one of the most surprising fortunes his city had ever produced. Behind that quiet life, a depression-raised Navy veteran grocer had taken the modest surplus of a frugal existence, year after year, and put it into strong American companies. Then done the patient, unglamorous thing that builds every fortune in these stories. He held. He reinvested every dividend. He never sold, and he never raided the machine. It grew to roughly $13 million. And when his estate was settled, it flowed exactly as he had planned, into a scholarship fund for the Catholic high school, that had once given a working-class boy his start. We talk a great deal in modern personal finance about getting rich quickly, about leverage, side income, the perfect entry, the well-timed exit. All of those things have their place. But the quiet truth, the one the financial press rarely tells, because it is slow and it does not sell, is that the most reliable path to deep, durable, world-changing wealth is the one Leonard Gigowski walked. Patient, boring, consistent, unglamorous, decade after decade after decade. Effective. If there is a North Star in this channel, a single thesis we will return to in every story, in every case study. It is this. Ordinary people doing ordinary things with extraordinary patience build slow fortunes. More of them are out there right now behind shop counters and in modest homes than the world will ever notice. And the country, its schools, its libraries, its scholarship funds, its quiet institutions, is shaped quietly by their hands. If you want more stories like this one, stories of ordinary, underestimated people who built extraordinary things, subscribe. There is no shortage of them. We are only getting started. 4, 5.